We don't have to accept the exchange between a promise of modest tax relief for some for a promise of education austerity for others.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So I did want to transition into education legislation because there's a lot happening with education. Last week was a really busy week with education legislation and committee hearings. There was less movement this week, which frankly is probably a good thing. The Alabama legislature will reconvene on Tuesday, May 23rd for its 24th day of the regular legislative session. Next week will be a 3-day week. There are only 7 legislative days left in the 2023 regular session. So let's buckle up and see if we can survive the rest of the session without too much damage. Public schools are the cornerstone of a community and critical to a democratic society. And yet across the country and right here in Alabama, public education is under attack. We've already mentioned efforts like the Divisive Concepts Bill, which directly targets educators and their ability to teach truthfully while also pushing offensive, ridiculous narratives about what's happening inside public school classrooms. As you heard in the Arise update, there are multiple voucher-style privatization bills advancing in the legislature. More on that in a moment. There's a renewed push for improving pay for education support professionals, or ESPs. Definitely support that. These are the support staff who help our school systems function, from the custodians and cafeteria workers to bus drivers and special education aides. Unlike certified educators like teachers, counselors, and librarians, or like school nurses, there is no state salary matrix for support staff. There's no state minimum salary. There's no guaranteed step raises or a step raise policy. There's no roadblocks to outsourcing or privatization of their jobs. We've seen how Huntsville City Schools has been a pioneer in this sort of privatization, outsourcing hundreds of support staff jobs to temp staffing agencies like Spur. Hiring and retention is a major problem, especially if and when folks can find better pay at the local McDonald's. Many support staff are doing it for the benefits, like the PHIP healthcare and the state pension, which of course outsourced employees don't have. A lot of times these folks work for the schools to have benefits and then work second and third jobs to be able to make ends meet. So the Alabama Education Association is making a push for a state minimum of $15 per hour. This was found to be highly offensive by the creeps at right-wing rag 1819 News, but I'm going to wait until Jacob is back next week before we put them on blast because I don't want him to miss out on that. That is right up his alley.
This is one of his wedding gifts.
So yeah, we're going to save that one for you, Jacob. Next
we love
week.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, hope you're having a great time.
Hope you're having a great time. Next week you can rant and rave at the 1819 creeps.
He'll be all pin up too. It'll be like a whole
it'll be fun.
week's worth.
Yeah.
So it'll be double.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, the Education Trust Fund budget has a record amount of revenue this year, and everyone wants a piece of the pie. There's been all sorts of court projects proposed. Governor Kay Ivey even wanted to fund a water park with education dollars. And then, as head of the retirement systems of Alabama, David Bronner put it, there's killing the future with tax cuts. Last year, the 2022 legislative session passed 18 tax cuts, costing the ETF budget $160 million per year, or $1.6 billion over the next 10 years. The 2023 legislature has introduced more than 20 additional tax cuts, none of which have revenue to replace them. The House unanimously passed HB 115 and 116, costing the Education Trust Fund $82 million per year. That's $820 million over the next 10 years. The cut to the state income tax on overtime, which is Anthony Daniels' bill that we've discussed previously, that would be about $40 million per year. Elimination of the grocery tax would result in a $600 million blow to the education budget. Now, Alabama has the second lowest tax revenue per capita, the lowest if you include the lottery. And I agree with Dr. Bronner that this makes for a financial disaster in the coming years. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for ending regressive taxes that disproportionately hurt working folks. Alabama's tax system is both highly inadequate to fund essential services while also highly regressive, with too much of the burden borne by the poor and the working class. We're all for removal of the grocery sales tax, and I'm not going to turn down a tax cut on overtime pay. But without replacement revenue, there are consequences. We have to reject this devil's choice, that the only way to get modest tax relief for some workers is to promise austerity for others. Relieving the tax burden on the poorest among us shouldn't mean cuts to our public schools. The Alabama legislators are presenting us with a false dichotomy. There are numerous ways they could raise more than enough revenue to pay for these tax cuts while protecting funding for education and other essential services. For one, they could tax the wealthy elites, tax the ruling class, the folks who can most afford it. Alabama legislators could close tax loopholes that benefit the richest among us. They could end the federal income tax deduction. We could look at the so-called timber land that is taxed at far lower rates than the land your home sits on and at lower rates than timberland in neighboring states. There's a lot of needed reform to our backwards tax system. But even if they couldn't muster that political will, even if they were too cowardly to dare risk offending the oligarchs, they could still generate billions in additional revenue without tax reform. Alabama legislators could legalize gambling, like casinos and sports betting. Alabama could legalize recreational marijuana, and Lord knows the first state in the South to do it will be booming. Alabama could do what folks have been asking for since before I was born, which is to establish a lottery, like all of our neighboring states.
I believe Alabama is actually the last state in the union that does not have a state lottery.
Wow.
Yeah, these are all pretty popular things, I would say, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I have also been told by some of the people who work at A&M that Alabama has some of the best soil for cannabis cultivation.
Oh.
We have a great agricultural setup in our colleges and universities. We have agricultural universities. We have a lot of farmers. We have good soil. We have Gulf Shores. We've got the mountains in Mentone. I'm just saying, if Alabama were the first state to do it, it would be booming, and we would be leading the South in a lot of ways.
We would be an island in the South.
Right. But, is that what's on the table? Of course not. And you can say there's drawbacks to all those policies I just listed, and that's fine to discuss, because of course there are, right? The lottery has its issues. But let's not pretend like the legislature doesn't have plenty of options on the table. We don't have to accept the exchange between a promise of modest tax relief for some for a promise of education austerity for others.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.
Which side are you on?